Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. We're just going to give people a few minutes to get on so they can find the Zoom link before we get started in the conversation. I appreciate all of you joining us here today for this special Black History Month conversation, but it's also like close to Valentine's Day, so I think it's appropriate that we're talking about Black women and Black love and Black marriage here in the United States. And so I appreciate all of you joining us and your support. So we're gonna wait till about 7:04 before we really get started, just to give people an opportunity to get on to the conversation. So again, thank all of you for joining us here today with our two hosts that will be introduced in later on. So if you want to, as we wait just to get more people to log in, if you want to type where you're from, how you heard about this event, you can type that in a chat. Feel free to be interactive. And again, thank you all for joining us. We're just going to wait a few more minutes to get people an opportunity to log on. Okay, Dr. Clardy, thank you for joining us. We got people from Wilmington. Okay, Dr. Ingram, you got some invites here from North Carolina, Los Angeles, Dallas, Texas. Okay, shout out to Brittany. Okay, we got people from Missouri. Instagram. Social media works. We got people all the way from Toronto. We got people from Canada. Okay, all right. We international today. So again, I want to thank all of you for joining us. I want to thank those of you who just logged on. I'm going to start with a brief introduction about what Entrepreneurial Appetite is before we get into today's conversation. So again, just really thankful for all of you being here. Entrepreneurial Appetite is a series of events dedicated to building community, promoting intellectualism, and supporting Black businesses. And I've been doing this for about 3 years or so. And just some brief history, in 2018, actually almost 3 years to the day, 4 years to the day maybe. Yeah, 4 years now, it's 2022. Oh my goodness, 4 years to the day. A friend of mine, Jason Bailey, we answered the call of a Black-owned business here in San Antonio, Texas, a burger joint called Mark's Outing. The owner, Mark Outing, put a call out on Facebook Live for people to come support his business. And we decided that we would fill a gap in our community where young Black professionals were having a hard time connecting with one another. So we got a state representative to be our guest speaker for that day. We got about 30 to 40 young Black professionals to find out about this Black-owned restaurant and to continue to support it. And from there, we've just continued to grow. And of course, as COVID-19 started, we shifted things online, and we have now been able to host these monthly book discussions that feature Black authors and entrepreneurs. And I think it's important that we continue to have these talks because oftentimes we don't have access to our scholars, right? And so I'm trying to bridge the gap between the academy and the community while also highlighting the good work of people who are doing all types of entrepreneurial good in Black communities. I also want to make you all aware of another part of one of the missions of Entrepreneurial Appetite. Those of you who are supporters of our Patreon, those of you who make donations to our platform, a portion of those donations go to support an endowment that I started at my alma mater, North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, to support graduate students in the College of Education. If it was not for North Carolina A&T, I would not have been able to get my doctorate. And so with two friends of mine, one who is currently pursuing her doctorate degree at the University of Maryland and a homeboy of mine who's at the University of Missouri, we started this endowed scholarship called From A&T to PhD. And so I want to thank all of you that have been supporters of us, and want to let you know that we are going to continue to do great work. And so without further ado, I'm going to get us started into today's conversation. And I want to first introduce LaDrea Ingram, who is a random friend of mine who lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, who I met randomly, I think a few years ago, as she was winning an award for the Black Chamber of Commerce there. And then again, I met her in a church parking lot as I was looking for the NAACP in Charlotte a few years ago. And I've gotten to know her and her husband fairly well, collaborated with her for a community curated event, the Social Justice Olympic Summit that she hosted the first time in Charlotte, North Carolina last year. And so just want to give her an opportunity to talk about the good work that she does as a social entrepreneur in Charlotte, but then also we'll go to her introducing our feature speaker for today, Dr. Dianne Stewart. So thank you, LaDrea, for being here. And I'm gonna fade to the background and let you all do your thing.
Thank you so much, Langston. Thank you for having this platform and being someone who I like to call Langston a social capital builder, because he knows how to build relationship equity. That is a skill set that he has, and individuals like him are needed in our community to really catapult us forward on missions and things that are centered around advancing social justice. So he's right. We did meet randomly again at a church parking lot. But you want to know what? It is not by happenstance. To me, things are intentional and purposeful. And so I'm so grateful for that. And like Langston said, I am a social entrepreneur, and I like to consider myself, when I think about my identity, it being centered around like this multi-dimensional identities, right? I'm a mother, I am a daughter, I am a granddaughter, right? I am a wife, I have 5 beautiful children, but I'm also, right, have identity centered around addressing social equity and really engaging in efforts that build community, that build Black and Brown communities that had been just challenged with oppressive natures and historical trauma and racial trauma in our community. So I'm really important part of the work that I do is centered around building community and mobilizing around areas of social justice. So I'm so grateful to be here on this evening to have a conversation around something called Black love and Black marriage, which really does help elevate and impact how we improve our communities. So without further ado, I would like to introduce who I am going to call a powerhouse intellectual, Dr. Dianne Stewart. And Dr. Dianne Stewart is a full professor at Emory University, and her focus is religion and African American studies. And she focuses on heritage, religious cultures in Caribbean and in the Americas. She was born in Kingston, Jamaica, and grew up in Hartford, Connecticut. She obtained her bachelor's degree from Colgate University in English and African American Studies. She also has her MDiv from Harvard Divinity School, and she received her PhD in systemic theology from Union Theology Seminar in New York City. So she is a powerhouse individual that is really going to bring forth a great conversation. And before I ask her to introduce herself in greater depth, I just want to just allow you all the space to really engage intentionally in that chat. This is a moment to just really create a community, to create an intentional space that we're gathering and connecting with each other. It's not every day where you get a chance to be with individuals that are professors, individuals that are students, individuals that are from Canada, right? You have before you on this evening, individuals that are coming from all different walks of life, from different areas throughout the country, the world, and we have this opportunity to commune with each other here on today. So please engage in the chat, get to know each other's name, and begin to mobilize on this evening in a way where we're really sharing in this community space. So Dr. Dianne, please go ahead and share a little bit more about yourself before we engage in further dialogue.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ingram. And I think we said we would go with first names. I'm really comfortable with that in this setting. I also want to thank Langston also for having this platform available to us. I tell you, as I listen to you, first of all, you're creating a family environment, which is just so wonderful. I'm tempted to write people back because people are really talking to me in the chat. And this is beautiful and just fun. And anyone who knows me knows I'm a communicator. So I am tempted. Thank you for all the great support and well wishes over there in the chat. So as you said, I am a professor, and I'm a person who knew I wanted to be a professor since my sophomore year in college. I am a professor in some ways turned public speaker. Most professors are public speakers, but in writing this book, Black Women, Black Love, America's War on African-American Marriage, my public really expanded. And so I find myself now engaging multiple audiences, different kinds of audiences. Yes, I created the course Black Love first in the year 2004. That course kind of went to the background for a while, but when I created that course, it was an undergraduate seminar. And when I created it, I did include a section on romantic love, and I was quite shocked by what I saw when I began to research romantic love. I had to think about, what do I want to bring to the students, to the class? But everywhere I turned, kept talking about how dire love, dating, and marriage is for Black women in particular. And in many respects, I knew that, but to see it in the literature, the way I was seeing it, left a kind of indelible impression on me. And so even though that course lay dormant for a couple of years, when I retaught it, I went back to those resources and additional resources, and just realized at that moment, I really need to write a book that speaks to my people, that speaks to Black people and the nation at large. Anyone else who wants to listen in, and I invite others to listen in, that will look at this problem, for those of us who see it as a problem, of the low rates of quality dating, coupling, marriage, family formation for Black people. Let me not say low rates of family formation. Let me say difficulties with certain kinds of family formation for African Americans or people of African descent. And so I'm not just interested in numbers, I'm interested in quality of relationship. And I felt that the conversation, the public conversation, which I really picked up, always focused on what Black women needed to do to fix themselves, what Black women needed to do to make themselves more attractive in a depleted marriage market or dating market. And I saw phenomena that kept occurring across history, across the involuntary presence of people of African descent in this nation, that we needed to string together, from the slave trade to social media. And that's what I tried to do in this book. So yes, I'm a professor, I'm a wife, I'm an author, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a granddaughter, I'm many of those things as well. I'm a mentor, those things matter to me, mentoring the next generation along. I'm an institution builder, but I am also the woman who wrote this book, Black Women, Black Love, because I have a message for my people.
That was powerful. That was so powerful. And I love how you just walked into this, humanizing this conversation.
Thank you.
You really humanized this conversation. And so I think it's fitting for one of the first questions as we move over to really engaging in dialogue, to really talk about, why should we be discussing this? Why is Black love and Black marriage an important conversation to be having in this present moment in time?
Yes, indeed. I think we all know that the family is the microcosm of society. The very first place that an infant begins to develop the hormonal environment to produce what is needed in that infant to become an empathetic, pro-social adult. That happens in the family. That happens between parent and infant. One of the things I've learned in teaching Black love and looking at the chemistry of the brain, looking at what happens when we fall in love or when we love in other ways. We love our children and our siblings and our friends, what is going on in the brain. And one of the things I learned is that we should always look into the eyes of babies when we're playing with them, because that produces the dopamine effect that allows them to begin to build the ability to empathize. The family is a microcosm of society. When we look at what has been happening to our community, I always say, I mean, it was happening when I was growing up. I mean, there was no difference. When we look at the pressing issues that have made front page news, especially since Obama's presidency, I always said, when Obama wins, they want to kill him, but they can't. So they're going to kill Black boys and Black men that they can kill. And when we look at what happened and how those kinds of deaths, and increasingly we are bringing awareness to the deaths of Black women as well. Right? The harassment, the abuse, the exploitation, the deaths of Black women and Black girls as well. When we look at all of that, it might seem like, okay, right, why does this matter? But when we look at how those experiences tear families apart, when we look at how partners, spouses, siblings, uncles and aunties, mothers and fathers and grandparents respond to the abuse, the assault on their family members, and we see what it means to take a family member away from a family, the family is impacted. So to me, if we look at many of the issues that we contend with as it relates to policy violence versus policy privilege that that whites have in this country, if we look at many of the issues we're contending with, the family is at the center of them. The family is right there. But I want to say this too. We are social beings. We need and deserve love, family, and community. Plain and simple. We need fulfillment in our lives. And I tell you, at first, I did not want to bring love and romance into my Black love course. I mean, we were doing things like, we were reading Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, we were looking at Malcolm X, Martin Luther King's literature, we were looking at love in the family, parental love. We were looking at all kinds of things. And I thought students are going to think that, this is not a serious class if I do that, etc. But I tell you, in bringing in Black romantic love, it allowed me to talk about the CDC study that showed that Black men spend more quality time with their children. This was a 2013 study, spend more quality time with their children than white and Latino men. Who would have thought, when we think of all the controlling images and messages out there of the absent Black father, even if there is not a custodial father in the home, it doesn't mean that fathers are not involved with their children. Especially in the early ages, we're seeing that a lot of fathers, Black fathers, are involved with their children at early ages. So it allows us to address these other issues. And I would say to the students, it's really important that we do romantic love, because if there's one place where anti-Blackness, white racism should not enter our lives, the man, so to speak, should not trample upon us, it's once we come back inside our homes, the protection of our homes, the love that we give to one another. But I found out that the man is in the bedroom too. I had to acknowledge that. But I think if there's one place that we have the most control to get that white man out of the bedroom, out of our lives, it's when we close the door to our private homes. And I agree with Bell Hooks. She said we must figure out a way to build cultures of love in our communities. And that love is a sanctuary against so much that we face in this anti-Black world. We should not underestimate it. We should not underestimate the power of it. And the very principles that undergird love, the qualities that we respect as or what it means to love in a healthy manner. Those qualities are apparent across all kinds of love relationships, whether it's dating and marriage, whether it's child parent, whether it's friendship. Those qualities are apparent across all kinds of healthy relationships. So I think it's crucial. I think we need to continue to do this work, to be thinking about it. We also need, LaDrea, we also need a new conversation between Black women and Black men about love.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I tried to do in the book was to show we're so used to a deficit model that always looks at what's wrong with Black people. But what I wanted to show, not because I wanted to kind of curate the sources and put out some sort of museum display of what I wanted to show. No, this is literally what the sources were saying. I never knew I would write this much about Black men in this book. But when I saw what was happening to Black men, I mean, I knew some of this, but I didn't know it to this extent. When I saw that, I had to tell that story too. And I would like Black women and men to come into conversations about love, dating, and marriage with much more sympathy and empathy for one another.
Yeah.
And, and to be fair, I do focus on heterosexual love in my book. And I would say this for all kinds of love, dating, marriage relationships. But to be fair and to be, just transparent, I did focus on heterosexual coupling. So that's important to me as well in this time. What I see on social media, what I've engaged, we need a new conversation that's based on empathy, sympathy, and hope and faith in one another.
Yeah. That is some power words right there. You use so many different words that I think can be highlighted in this. But I think what you said right there was a mouthful, specifically around Black women aren't the problem. There's a social reality. There are social conditions that are impacting what you call the forbidden love, right? And I would really like you to really hone in on that on this evening for individuals to really truly understand that concept. Because to really embrace love, it's to be able to understand the forces that are coming against it. Yes. And your book really does that. And it's in helping individuals know, like it's not you, it's you just have to understand the conditions that may be working against you, so that you know how to fully engage and embrace love in the way that you deserve, in the way that you are destined to have it. So I would love for you to really talk a little bit more about the social realities, the social constructs that exist that may be fighting against individuals being able to experience the fullness of what love has to offer.
First of all, when people go back and listen to this, please stop on how you just framed that. I haven't heard anyone frame it better than what you just framed, because I know that some audiences have trouble with the trauma that this book presents through the stories of our ancestors. I know that some people have trouble with it, but I love the way you presented it. One of someone that I know, a Black woman, said, reading your book made me feel like, my goodness, if they went through that and they loved, I know I can try harder in my marriage. Like, it gave me the motivation, it gave me the inspiration to know that they loved in a way that could be transgenerational, that could impact me this way by hearing their stories. It was really gratifying to hear. So yes, I needed to name this problem, this issue. And so I did call it Forbidden Black Love. And what I discovered, and the reason I shaped the book the way I did, there's only one issue that dropped out that I just couldn't bring it in this book. And I'll say what that is in a second. But the reason I shaped it the way I did is because I saw 4 major, what I call pillars of Forbidden Black Love. And what I mean by forbidden Black love are the systems and structures that make love, and I mean healthy, quality love, coupling, and marriage difficult, delayed, or impossible for millions of Black people. That's what I mean by it. I'll say it one more time. The systems and structures that make love, coupling, and marriage difficult, delayed, or impossible for millions of Black people. That's what I mean by forbidden Black love. And I found that there were 4 major pillars of it. The first is the separation of Black marriages and families, Black couples and families. That begins with the slave trade. When we have most women who were brought into the slave trade being of marriage age, we have to pause and realize that the separation of Black families and marriages began on the African continent. It impacted our relatives in Africa as much as it impacted us. You take someone from the family unit, it tears that linked family asunder. And so that, I just had to grieve that and realize that and start there. But that continues throughout slavery, right? It continues throughout slavery. When we think of the fact that after the outlawing of the international slave trade, we have close to 700,000 couples being separated and families. When we look at all of slavery, we have about 1 million Black people being moved from the eastern corridor over to Western states. And they're being separated from their children, their siblings, their parents, their spouses. Many, many, many couples, married couples, did not even live on the same farms. And on large plantations, even those were in the minority, on large plantations, many of them, because of the way gender assignments were often divided, men, they wanted to save time so that men could be near their workstations and women and the children could be near their own workstations. And so even on large plantations, people could have to, walk hours just to see their loved one. So this is the nature of slavery. The master and the mistress's authority trumps the authority and the sovereignty of marriage. And so we know that the slave system, shows that. The other pillar is, and that continues when we look at what happened with welfare, when we look at what's going on with mass incarceration. So that continues. That's why I named that a pillar. The second one is racist and sexist jurisprudence, policies, and legal transactions. So, I like Moya Bailey's term, misogynoir, and I kind of played with that and said misandry noir. We have to talk about misandry noir as well. Anti-Black male, and of policies, legislation, and practices. And so one of the things that becomes really clear, and I cite one of my former students, Dr. Alexis Wells, who's a professor of religion at Stanford University. She was at Vanderbilt for several years, and she recently moved to Stanford, but her book is absolutely phenomenal. Now, she's someone that that should be on this program, The Souls of Women Folk. And she's looking at women's culture, women's spirituality, women's religiosity in the Lower South during the antebellum period. And Alexis says, Dr. Wells says, Wells Ogogome, let me say her full name. She says, the Black woman's womb is a capital asset. Mm. We cannot forget that. Oftentimes, because of the kinds of androcentric histories we are told from childhood, elementary school to adulthood, and the way we're trained, even in college and etc., the default slave is a Black man. If there's going to be a default, it needs to be the Black woman, because it's only through her womb that more quote unquote slaves are made. And so what we see is, for example, in 19th century wills, people, the owners of enslaved Africans, willing them upon their death to, let's say, their wives or what have you. And basically, once my wife dies, the husband is to go free, for example, but the wife and her increase must be sold. So because her womb is a capital asset, oh no, we're going to make money off of this. So it must be sold and divided amongst my grandchildren. So that's what I mean by racist, sexist policies, what's going on with in the post-emancipation period, how marriage is understood, how Black widows of Civil War veterans are being treated, and we see it all the way up to today. The third, sexual and reproductive violence and control. I don't even need to say more about that. Sexual and reproductive violence and control. The breeding that Black women and men were forced to do, the creation of a whole color caste system as a result of coercive or abusive rape and sexual liaisons between Black women and white men. And related to that, the fourth is colorism and phenotypic stratification. Now, I say CPS because when we say colorism, we often only think of skin color. Maybe hair texture, but I mean all of the phenotypic features that are deemed to be either beautiful and valuable or the opposite, right? Grotesque, ugly, and not valuable. And so those realities, those pillars still impact us today. They begin with slavery and the slave trade, and they all impact us today.
Ooh. There's something that you said in the midst of all of that insight was that you had to grieve.
Yes.
And I think sometimes we are aware, but we don't acknowledge. Because in order to truly grieve, you have to turn your awareness into acknowledgement that can then create action and allow you to grieve. So there's so much that needs to happen for healing, right? There's so much healing that needs to happen. And the more these conversations we have, the more healing can be, demonstrated in our community. So I think this is the perfect opportunity to really hone in on. So you talked about forbidden, which is defined as not allowed. And then you also, one of my favorite quotes in your book, you talk about this concept of hidden. And you said that you describe how Black women often lack of options for meaningful love and partnerships with Black men is the most hidden and thus neglected civil rights issue to date. And when we think about hidden, that means uncovered. So how does this forbidden concept and this hidden truth, right, possibly create contentious relationships between Black men and Black women? And how do we address that? How can we think about how these conversations can promote healing?
Absolutely, because marriage is very personal, right? Love and dating is very personal. We often keep it within that realm, but marriage is a civil institution. We have over a dozen cases decided at the Supreme Court where the justices have declared marriage a civil right. It is a civil institution. One of the things that made it that was, how do we socialize the freed men and women after slavery into dutiful citizens? One of the ways to do that is through inculcating in them a concept of patriarchal marriage and family that will allow them to be socially controlled and to behave well, so to speak. And so when we think about it, it is actually a civil institution. And when we think about the benefits of marriage, I'm speaking about when it works well and it's healthy, it becomes really a civil right. Black people deserve the benefits of what marriage can bring. It brings companionship. It brings a structure for regulating the care of young people and elders. It brings support. It brings wealth building. There are things to be said about that in the Black community, given how far behind we are, but generally speaking, it brings that. It brings the formation of family and community. This is a civil right that we're being denied. And I think if we begin to look at it as a civil right, LaDrea, if we begin to do that, I think we can begin to turn the corner on it. I think we can have, and And because I kind of shift the gaze away from only discussing this issue as a personal issue, doesn't mean that I don't feel that people should constantly work on themselves. We must all constantly seek to be better persons for ourselves and those we love. So I am not against self-help, counseling, therapy, conversation. I'm all for it. But if we want to solve this problem, I am convinced that the only way we're going to do it is if we treat it as a civil right that it is, that's being denied us, and put it on our activist agendas. Black people, Black women are phenomenal at civil rights. So many people have benefited from civil rights in this country as a result of our leadership. And so put it on the agenda so that we can do something about it for future generations at a systemic and structural level, right? So that it's just not one or two, and so many people are disappointed.
Yeah, yeah. And you really touch on some of the initiatives that had been done. You talked about when Bush's administration, he worked on trying to address it through policy initiatives. Obama furthered it. And then you talked about how Trump also tried to further it as well. But because they're not getting to the root.
Exactly. The problem that I have, and this is where the Democrats and the Republicans are no different for me. The problem that I have is they're always operating out of a deficit model. They're always only treating symptoms. They're never getting to the root of what has caused these symptoms. High rates of crime, high rates of mass incarceration in Black communities, particularly poor and under-resourced Black communities, high rates of health issues. All of these are symptoms of underlying conditions. And I tell you, one of the reasons I call Chapter 2 the Reign of Terror, I don't know if most of the audience would know, but there are many freedmen and women coming out of slavery that said slavery was better than freedom. And if you read Chapter 2, you'll know why they said it. I tell you, you will know why they said it. And so the government had an opportunity at that moment to try to make things right. And what does the government do? Instead of paying reparations, instead of adequately addressing the harm of slavery, of what it means to render a human being bleeding cargo, what it means to render a human being a commodity that produces more commodities. Instead of, it can never make up for all the harm, but some of it. The government did what? Gave land grants to millions of white immigrants and other white Americans who were just here. Basically, they had to pay a filing fee and they got wonderful land grants. It has created the white middle class, in addition to the GI Bill, where many Blacks suffered and did not get access to benefits that they were due from the GI Bill. So this is what we're grappling with here. You know, many people, especially, I mean, I'm an immigrant Black, so I know, I grew up here, but many people, especially immigrant Blacks, really have been sold this myth, and of course, many white Americans and other Americans have been sold this myth that with Martin Luther King and civil rights, it was all better. But they don't realize how bad it even got after slavery and how that further debilitated Black people. So one, we have to look at the 10 or more generations of wealth that was stolen from Black people during slavery. We have to deal with that. But I tell you, my colleague, she's a phenomenal, brilliant demographer, Dr. Janera Easley, we were on a panel together. I was talking about my book, and it was about housing, and that was a chapter that I didn't write. The chapter was going to be a house to love in, because when we look at housing regulations, racist covenants that lock Black people out of white neighborhoods, redlining that didn't value Black neighborhoods and would not, where banks would not provide support for investing in Black neighborhoods. All of these things, the Fair Housing Acts, urban renewal, destroyed. You need a place to love. You need a place to lay your head at night. Gentrification. So that's another chapter that should have been in the book. I tried to sneak it in between 3 and 4 a little bit, but I tell you, she says, you know, we can get reparations, but given my research, we're going to lose it in one generation if we don't deal with these racist, violent policies that literally siphon Black people's resources away from themselves. So I still say, Black people, I still say reparations, wealth building. What I call it in the book is we need to grapple with, to deal with at a systemic and structural level. And I mean the government, I mean the people who are responsible for this, with inherited poverty and wealthlessness.
Mhm.
We don't just need salaries, we need and deserve wealth. And I talk about one particular initiative that is Derek Hamilton's initiative, the phenomenal economist on baby bonds, which is now being tried in DC, I understand. I think that's a more recent thing. So hopefully it can become national as a way to think about that. We need to overcome, and we haven't talked much about this, the ideal. We need to dispense with the idealized image of the nuclear patriarchal family as the ideal family, right? The perfect, the God revealed, biblically revealed, God-given institution. And I know that's hard for a lot of people, especially a lot of Christians. I know it is, but you've got to sit with chapter 2 and you will see how missionaries coming south, how the federal government, particularly through the Freedmen's Bureau, which was authorized to marry and certify the marriages of Black people after slavery, how they inculcated in Black freed women and men the notion that the husband is the head of the household, totally a Eurocentric patriarchal notion, not in any way related to our African heritage at all, that wives must be submissive to their husbands and helpmates for their husbands. But what we lack oftentimes is a flexible and informed interpretive approach to the Bible. We have allowed white fundamentalist and evangelical Christians to dictate to us how we should interpret that Bible. That happened in the early 20th century. Most Black people were not Christian by the end of slavery. A lot of people think that they were, but they weren't. Black people it's the Civil War and its so-called success that really began to turn some Black folk onto okay, maybe this God really did come through for us then. That's what Black, and the institutionalization, right? And the supports and the power of the Black church, right? Joining a Black church was like, claiming your own last name.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It was so important. It was the protective space in many respects, right? But it did become a patriarchal Black church, and increasingly so. And we've been fed by white slave owners, by white evangelists, by white missionaries, that the model that we have come to idealize as the God-given institution of marriage and family is the biblically revealed model that we must internalize. I think we need to be much more creative. I think we need to be much more creative in our biblical interpretations. I think we need to be, which our ancestors were coming out of slavery, they were much more creative than we are today, especially after the rise of fundamentalism in the early 20th century. I also think that we need to ask ourselves, what models, what Africana family forms do we have? Doesn't matter if they've tried to pathologize them. They've tried to pathologize them, but what are those family forms that we have? For example, like the matrifocal unit, right? Or what people would call extended family, play cousins and all this kind of stuff, right? What do we have that has been working for us? Why would we want to atomize ourselves into nuclear family units as Black people in this anti-Black world? We need extension, we need connection. But as I say in the book, if family wealth, kinship wealth cannot go without financial wealth. Because what happens with those connections, the more we're connected, our families end up bleeding and draining the few people that have been able to make it to a decent salary. It's not the family's fault. It's not the person who has that decent salary's fault that we don't have wealth to fall back on. And so that's why I say it has to be about wealth building and overcoming inherited poverty, has to be about, and let me say why about the patriarchal nuclear family. There are many reasons. I mean, studies show that relationships where egalitarian relationships report higher levels of love. Across race, culture, they report higher levels of love. And many people will say, well, Black people have much more egalitarian relationships with white people. I think we do. There's no doubt about it. But one of the reasons we do is because we have to. My question is, if we have that, but we're idealizing something else. My husband has to make more money than I do. I should be able to, just take care of the home or just work a little side job, but he's the provider. He's responsible for all of this. And we looked at the patriarchal Anglo society that has said Black men are basically boys. We're the patriarchs. Historically, that's exactly what they've said. And the way they've handled it in the modern period is mass incarceration. No, we're not going to allow you to be like we are, so to speak, right? So when people have those expectations, but because both people have to work, both people have to chip in, if they have those expectations, but they can't live them out, that's going to be a drain on the marriage. So I'm saying we need to change our ideas. Patriarchal marriage is not helping us. And I say that also because when I started looking at what are Black men thinking about marriage, first of all, I couldn't find that many studies. I mean, there are not that many people studying it. But what I found was, in one study in particular, where Black men and women were questioned, Black men and women are looking for one another to move each other up into the middle class. So that Black man who's perfectly fine for marriage, mature, responsible, has a job, but just happens to be making $35,000 a year, or 40,000. He's looking for the Black woman who's making 55 and 60,000. But guess what? She's looking for the Black man who's making 75 and 80,000. So we miss each other. We take ourselves out of the marriage market because we don't have the wealth to fall back on. We don't have the resources. So the wealth building is critical. Changing, expanding beyond that patriarchal model. And let me be clear what I mean by patriarchal. I don't care who does what in the household. Is it valued? I have no problem with stay-at-home moms. People need to decide what works for them. But when we say that a man can't be a stay-at-home dad, he's not a real man. What if he's great at it? What if it's the mother that has this ambition to take on the world and climb to the top of her, whatever it is, but he doesn't? What if he's a painter? What if he doesn't for whatever reason? And now we're going to demasculinize him because he's taking care. My father was one of the most, he is one of my heroes. And my father didn't make a lot of money. Would I say that my father didn't deserve to be married because he didn't make a lot of money? My father was a machine operator at a ball bearing company for my entire life until he retired. And he cooked, he cleaned. My mom had more jobs than my dad for a number of reasons. He cooked, he cleaned, he took us to our music lessons, he took us everywhere we needed to go. He did everything. And I've never felt less of a man for that. So we need that flexibility. We deserve it. For people to grow into who they are, what their talents are, and not lock us into what a wife is, what a husband is, what's feminine, what's masculine. We need to rethink some of this. And chapter 2 will show people why we internalized it in the first place, and that this is not coming from our culture and our heritage.
Yeah. So all of that, I love how you brought all of those major concepts and put it all together, and really thinking through what you identify marriage as, and it's a partnership, individuals coming together to join forces in a way that they have these goals, these missions, that it takes the two of them to exceed in those missions. And so thinking through what does that look like? And it may not be these gender roles that we have been socialized into. My husband cooks and cleans, right? But it allowed me to pursue a doctoral degree, right? It allowed me to be able to be successful and still be a mother of 5. People ask me, how do you do it? My husband is amazing. And we don't do gender roles. right? We do what does Team Ingram need to be successful?
I love
And
it.
it may be right now he's focusing on pastoralship and I'm out here doing this. It because we're a team, right? And we love each other, and it allows us to be successful in our marriage because we don't look at it as, this is a designed, socialized way of doing marriage, that, maybe our grandparents did it and other individuals in our family do it, but that's okay. It what works for us and what allows us to, meet our vision and mission in life. And yes, we are pastors. And so we're still able to operate and understand that we're still flowing in the mission and vision that we believe God gave us, but yet we still are doing it in a way that we are authentically designed to do it. So I'm so grateful that you brought up all those key perspectives and proponents that individuals can kind of sink into and listen to. And I think this is a perfect segue to really go in and allow individuals to kind of put in the chat, ask questions, and really think about, where should we be going in this conversation? What are the pathways forward, right? How do we not just have, right, this moment and this discussion, but we extend the conversation into actionable next items and steps? And so I offer you all, as Dr. Stewart really talks about, what are some things we can kind of do and what additional conversations, I want you all to be in the chat and really chime in on really giving us some questions that we can kind of focus on and talk through the remainder of this session.
Absolutely. I love some of these comments. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to read some. So Tamika says, I think it's important to not get caught up in gender roles, especially when a man is coming home from prison. Ooh, he may struggle to be the financial provider, but he is so valuable in more ways than Trump money. He may feel down on himself when he is not providing. Man, that's real.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to go ahead, Dr.
No, you go ahead, Langston. No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
I wanted to there's an anonymous attendee who wrote a question in the chat, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention. So it says, with the push against Black marriage in media, policy, and so on, how do Black people develop a mindset to take ownership of the state of Black marriage and begin making efforts to build love and respect of each other, self-respect and humanization, to know that we are worthy to build healthy marriages?
It's such a great question. Such a great question. I think we have to do this at every level and in every space where we gather. So at the micro level, as individuals, wherever we have influence with our own children, siblings, spouses, friends, I think we have to keep the conversation going, but we need information to do this, right? I mean, I don't want to just tout my book. I do think I open this up so that we can talk differently about love, but there's also people like Bell Hooks. I mean, her book, The Will to Change, is so phenomenal in terms of addressing the masculinity issues and the patriarchy. And it's so accessible. And it's not super long. That book is a game changer to me. She also has Salvation, Black People in Love, but that book, The Will to Change, it's every Black man who cares about this issue, or even just himself, should read that book, right? So I think, one, we need information. We need to encourage our communities to gather information. And then where do we meet? Where do we gather? We definitely gather in our religious institutions. Mm-hmm. So, and our religious institutions have been the source of a number of programs and platforms that become national. One of the things I really loved about the early Black church, I'm thinking about Mother Bethel in Pennsylvania. This was, the Black church was a meeting space for the Negro Convention movement, where they were debating and deciding major political platforms. It was the political and spiritual pulpit, so to speak, right? It was the source for that. And so I think, one, we need to figure out, how do we connect? How do we meet? We also meet on social media. As much as how would I put it? I hesitantly came to social media. My niece had to push me to get Instagram, and she was right. My cousin had to push me to reactivate Facebook, which I only opened up to monitor my nieces and nephews when they were adolescents, the first set of nieces and nephews. And he was right. And Twitter, it is important. So I think it means gathering. My niece just made me open up a clubhouse. So I just told someone, I think that person might be on this call, I'm not sure. I just told someone that I want to have a conversation next week about why Black men should divest from patriarchy. And I would like to have Black men in the room. The other place that we begin, for Black men who have experienced a new form of humanhood, a form of manhood that does not acquiesce to the stereotype, that is noble, and that is a model for how others can be in the world and be comfortable with their manhood. We need you to speak. We need you to become our womanist warriors, our, anti-patriarchal warriors. We need Black men allies to be on the front lines, showing what it looks like. Patriarchy doesn't just hurt Black women and children, it hurts Black men. It also hurts Black men. It limits Black men. It puts them in boxes and places undue responsibility on them in a society that is always saying, you are not a man. You are not a man. So those are some places that we should begin. I think we need to find ways to gather and use social media to have informed conversations with sympathy and empathy for one another. That's important, with patience for one another. I think we also need to take advantage of our social and religious institutions where we gather and get the message out, get our churches, our mosques, our temples to do programs. I mean, why can't we have a national year of focus on Black love, marriage, and family? Why couldn't we do that in the Black community? And wherever we are, however, so those are the things that we need to do. And I always say, I'm not the policymaker, I'm the scholar, I'm the academic who did the research, but I'd love to be at the table with the policymakers and policy implementers. I'd love to be there. It's just not what I do. But I think there is a lot that one could take from my book and a number of other books and begin to transform it into workable solutions.
Yeah. So it looks like we have two additional questions that I want you to get to. So one is also from an anonymous attendee that says, is there any perspective for you or in your book that discusses the seeming trend for successful Black men to abandon the Black woman / family for other preferences?
That's a really good question. So there are a couple of things, and I'm actually writing a follow-up book because audiences are asking for more. So I'm going to do a lot more work on the biblical material because that's my thing. That's my training, my background. So I'm going to do a lot more work on why I argue that we need new lenses to read these biblical passages that we think are telling women to be submissive, that we think. I'm going to really lay that out, and I'm not going to use big words or anything. I'm going to lay that out in a way that people can understand it. But I'm also going to take this on. It's interesting, for most of when I was doing the research, I even had, grad students who were sociology, focused on sociology. It was really hard for me to get demographic data that took into account class. So we know that Black men who are highly successful in terms of the salaries that they earn, who've been highly educated, they marry much later than their white male counterparts, if they marry at all. And so from what I know, we don't exactly know why. I now know, I finally found the stat that says that they also marry 3 times as much outside the race as Black men overall. right? Black men from other classes. But I do want to say this. So Black women, the latest statistics we tend to have were that Black women marry about 12% outside the race, Black men 24%. So it's double that. So I just want to say something, and I don't want people to jump on me, but I am really, really concerned about the Black boy, adolescent, who begins to come into his manhood feeling like the only person he would be interested in dating is either a racially ambiguous woman or a white woman or maybe an Asian woman, but not a Black woman, and especially not a dark-skinned Black woman. That deeply concerns me. But I just want us to stop for a second. Even if 24% of Black men married outside of the race, that's still 76% of Black men marrying within the race. The majority of Black men do want to marry within the race. And I just want us to remember that. And so one of the things that I saw in analyzing that OkCupid study, which was really interesting, is that Black men actually discounted white women. So when it comes to dating, now, when it comes to marriage, we can't say what this means for marriage. They actually discounted white women. So white women had a negative value in that study, whereas Black women were giving a premium, a little bit of a premium. The interesting thing, though, was that Latino women and Asian women the premium that they gave to Latino women and Asian women was double what they gave to Black women. And when you see how deeply discounted Black women were by Asian men, Latino men, and white men, it is so sad. Now, this is for dating. This is for dating. People, some, men can be complicated sometimes, and they date differently than they marry. So this is what we saw for dating. This is what I think has been going on. I believe that since the MTV, the video TV generation, I could be wrong, but this is kind of anecdotally what I believe. Media has had such an influence upon beauty and desire in the Black community. And the promotion of fair skin, a loose hair curl pattern, long hair, certain kinds of phenotypic features, that resemble, the typical Caucasian features, for example, that has been just beaten into us, especially since it's just been drilled and it's everywhere. So I do think that you add that to the fact that there's this kind of, the cool Black male athlete, right? The cool Black male entertainer that just seems to get access, like passport. His coolness becomes a passport to so many different other people and communities, and it makes him all the more attractive to non-Black women. I think we are dealing with some challenges, and don't talk about the current television commercials, my goodness. I think we are dealing with some challenges, but I do want us to remember that the majority of Black men still want to marry Black women, or seem to want to, or at least they do, right? I think that's important for us to remember. I think sometimes it feels almost hopeless, but I think we cannot underestimate how important it is to be actively pro-Black with our children when it comes onto issues of beauty, value, and desire. Actively pro-Black of every skin shade, of every skin shade. We have to instill in them at a very young age, and to actually talk with our children, the young people in our lives, about the systemic forces that actually work on them psychologically, even unconsciously, that would seek to shift their focus elsewhere, all right, or to shape their tastes and desires and what they understand to be beautiful and valuable. And I tell you, because colorism, it doesn't serve fair complexion people either. What it does, it gives them a false sense of value and beauty based on what? Based on skin color? What is that? Based on the shape of your nose? Really? What is that? How does that help fair-skinned people? It leads to superficial, it can lead to superficial character. It's not fair to them to even give this impression, or that somehow how you look has something to do with what you develop on the inside, right? So I think it detracts from character building. It harms everybody, so to speak. So yes, it is a problem. And I have seen a lot of very vulgar, vile, very sad things in social media. But I still encourage Black women not to give up on Black men. I know some Black women have, and I'm going to take on the divestment movement in the next book as well. I still encourage Black women. I've got 3 brothers. I can't give up on Black men. I got a wonderful father. I can't give up on Black men. I think we have to always come to the drawing table. We have to talk with one another. We have to share what has happened to us so that we can wake up and realize. And let me be clear, I'm not trying to police people's relationships either. I'm not saying that someone can't fall in love with a non-Black person. That can happen. It's almost like the hair thing, right? Like, I never want to talk about hair with Black women because I never want anybody to think that I'm judging, how Black women wear their hair. But my students will sometimes ask me over the years, and I've worn my hair all kinds of ways, low cut, afro, you name it, like braids, all kinds of things. And, now I have these sister locks, but they would sometimes ask me, and I would say, look, if you cannot go out in the rain with your straightened hair and let it get frizzy, then I would say you probably have some things to work on. But, can you perm your hair or can you straighten your hair? It's not for me or anybody else to police that. It really isn't. But do you know what your natural hair looks like? That's the question I want to ask you. Do you even know what it looks like? And I would say the same thing about love. If you make statements like, oh, I would never date a dark-skinned woman, or I would say you have some work to do. If you happen to fall in love with somebody, that's one thing. But if you carry around this perspective that dark-skinned women are not deserving of me, and my understanding is that very, very dark men go around doing that, which I find very interesting. Or you carry around a perspective of, I just think dark skin, Black, typical, traditionally stereotypic African features are ugly, or this, or that, then you've got some work to do. That's what I would say. But let's remember that most Black men are and want to be married to Black women.
Well, Dianne, this is a really great dialogue. We have two more minutes left before we transition out. Well, no, I think we can ask a couple more questions. Langston, keep me true to time.
Yeah, you good. We got some time.
Okay, good. So I seen a question in the chat. I recognize that we're talking about, right, the beauty and the psychology of beauty and how that impacts, right, your perceptions of how you're going to engage in marriage, or your choices of who you're going to be with. And Yvonne asked, how do you think the media contributes to interracial marriages? It seems they are very intentional on promoting Black men with other raced women in commercials, etc. Do you think this is true or not?
Oh, I definitely think it's true. In fact, I've started to count. I think I've seen 4 commercials with Black couples in the last couple months, and relative to 40 with Black men with racially ambiguous women or white women, or the opposite, Black women with racially ambiguous women or white women, and even with LGBTQ couples, similar kinds of things, right? And I've seen, they often even do this. They'll have a Black man in the commercial with a Black man who's clearly darker complexion with a racially ambiguous child, even if the mother is not in the commercial. It's unbelievable. So I have had several thoughts about this, and this is something I'm going to take up in the new book, in the follow-up volume. I've had several thoughts about this. One of the reasons we have to be on the front lines doing things is because we live in a culture where white America has never had to truly deal with its own pathology. And this is what I mean. White America has been able to take a very superficial approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. They've been able to take a very superficial approach to racial justice because they never go to the foundational problem. They always start with symptoms.
Yeah.
Oh, George Floyd died through this racist aggression. Breonna Taylor died through this racist aggression. Let's start doing commercials. We all are one in the world. Let's start doing commercial. And certainly some people will say, mixed race children or multi-race children have a right to see themselves. And I agree, I don't disagree. But when we look at the fact that most Black people are married to each other, how does what we see on TV work in proportion to what's actually real on the ground? That's my first point. But I could imagine that this is what's happening is people are in the boardroom. I'm trying to figure this out right now. I have my research assistants kind of working on this. People are in the boardroom saying, we have to be inclusive. We have to show everybody deserves to see themselves on TV. We have to do whatever, right? I can imagine people are in the boardroom doing that. And then, oh, that company did it. Now we're going to do it. That company did it now. And it's just spreading like wildfire. I'll find out because I'm researching this. But what I know is it is troubling. It is highly troubling because symbols matter. Yep. And with this, as this country is based on anti-Blackness, this is how whiteness gets its identity, is through an anti-Blackness. One of the pathologies of white society, and most whites in this country, even when they're well-meaning, one of the pathologies is that they respond to the injustices of a racist America. They respond by engaging in acts that proves that they are not racist.
Yeah.
That's how they respond. It's never a response that truly equalizes the playing field, that truly repairs what has happened. It's always a response that shows we're not racist. We're not racist. Look, we're inclusive. And that's the problem with some of these commercials. I'm sure there are all these well-meaning people doing it because they don't want to face what James Baldwin told us we must face many years ago, what the Field sisters call racecraft, that their most cherished civil religion. And what I mean by that is religion outside of religion outside of the sacred text, outside of church, outside of the thing that binds them together. It's not the flag. The thing that binds this nation together. It's not the flag. It's not monuments. It's not the Constitution. We saw what they did on Capitol Hill. It's whiteness. It is whiteness. And that is the problem with these commercials, with so many of the measures they take. They've never had to be serious about addressing the foundational structure, which is an anti-Black racism in this country.
Ooh, now, and there's not enough thought leaders at the table either. And so that's my first way of recognizing if they're really trying to address anything. Who's the thought leaders at the table, right? I have seen far too long, we're going to deal with health equity, we're going to deal with racism, and you have no thought leaders that have studied this, like you talked about, the social constructs that are wrapped around in these. You're going to continue to get superficial responses because you don't have thought leaders at the table that know and understand what this is, that understands or even knows how to define racism. That's a whole separate conversation because not everybody defines it like it should be defined. So I just want to get to one last question somebody has, but boy, that one got me stirred up a little bit. So Justin asks, in thinking about going forward, can we conceive of marriages of more than two people as containing transformative possibilities for Black folks?
Can we think of marriages more than two people, meaning polyamory? Do they mean plural marriages? Is that what Justin means? Or do they mean more than two people in a marriage?
Justin, is that what you mean? You can kind of put in the chat yes or no.
Oh, interesting. Well, it's, and it's a good question. I mean, I think we can think of anything, or many things. And when I talk about different marriage structures and family formation in our heritage, plural marriage was one of those structures. One of the things that I think is interesting is, I don't necessarily promote it, to be honest with you, but I'm not, I'm a scholar. I don't judge it. I travel to Africa. Look, and this is really crucial. I tell people this all the time. I was on study abroad in Mexico as a senior at Colgate University. And I went into two people were always fascinated with me with my braids. They always wanted to talk to me. It was really interesting. And I was in Chiapas and Chamula, and I went into these are some of the most indigenous parts of Mexico. And I went into people's homes where plural marriage was being polygamous homes. People act as if polygamy is African. It's not African, it's global. People were practicing polygamy in Europe, for God's sake. It is a global phenomenon. It doesn't belong to Africans. It is a global phenomenon. This was in 1990, people were practicing polygamy in Mexico. So it is a marriage system, right? It is true. I think it is true that we are not monogamous by saying our hearts can be, in more than one place at the same time. There's no doubt about it. But I tell you, we need to do another show on this. And we need to do something else on this, because it's what I've learned about love in the brain. And I tell you, I've had these conversations with my students because, okay, it was funny. The first Black Love course, because I had been divorced several times, I was like, I told them, I want my parents to fix me up with somebody. Forget this. Let me find it on my own. I have students from South Asia, Africa, where the parents are very involved. I was like, give me that. I want that kind of marriage. Okay. I want that traditional marriage. But then we talked about the modern approach where, it's two individuals who find each other, then the families might get on board later. Whereas in more of the traditional, it's marrying the whole family. Well, I tell you, it's in understanding what happens with the brain that I came to understand both models and how they emerge. I tell you, one of the reasons I think monogamous marriage happened in the way that it did. One, I think it has to do with the change of economy, the change of, modes of production and all of that. I think, as society industrializes and things change, the marriage structure changes in many places. But I think it has to do with the fact that for our species, we need at least two adults raising children in order for them to have the pro-social intelligences and qualities that they need to actually grow up into adulthood, to make it to adulthood and mate and keep the species going. And so the way the brain works, the chemicals that get involved for lust, for attraction, and for bonding, for staying together, make me understand monogamous marriage, to be honest with you, and why that has emerged. But I can also understand plural marriage in terms of the fact that the way children are reared together with many parents, for example, right? So to me, this is what I want to say. I don't want to say that plural marriage is the answer to this problem. I don't want to say that, although some people are doing that. Some people are doing it in more than one way, or doing the co-mothering. Some people where their children have the same father, the father might be in jail, they're getting together. The mothers are getting together, babysitting for one another. It's quite fascinating because that is often a part of plural marriage. But what I don't like is when people, often men, they want to cheat on their spouses, or they want to cheat on their girlfriends, and be disloyal, infidelity, and then they want to slip back and call that polygamy. That's not polygamy. Polygamy is a marriage system with rules and regulations for caring for everyone in the marriage system. That is not polygamy. You can cheat on your wives in polygamy, and you can cheat on your wife in monogamy. Right? So I would say, sure, I think so. I don't necessarily promote it in this context because, just trouble with the law. I mean, maybe we can change the law. I don't know. But I don't necessarily promote it, but I don't judge it. I think there are all kinds of marriage structures that have emerged. And I think culture and even species development has a lot to do with why they've emerged the way they do. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I hope so.
Wow, that was awesome. I hope that everybody enjoyed this wonderful discussion, just like I did. And a lot of people were saying they need a part 2. I am going to shift this over to Langston to roll us out. Thank you all for joining us and being a part of this wonderful discussion. Thank you, Dr. Stewart. It has been a wonderful pleasure engaging in this dialogue with you.
Thank you, Dr. Ingram. I've just so enjoyed getting to know you and learning about this podcast, Langston, and you've got a follower. I love it. I've already been listening to some of the older ones, so I love it.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart, and Dr. Ingram, thank you as well. I appreciate everyone who came. I appreciate the dialogue. I got a whole list of books I got to start reading, especially that Bell Hooks. You know, to be honest, my homeboy Corey was like, Langston, you need to read. I think it was the Bell Hooks books that you talked about. I was like, I don't really read Bell Hooks. Like, I've never read her stuff, but since you brought it up, like, I'm gonna go read the Bell Hooks book. And the next book that you write, I'm gonna read that one too. So
thank you. People are asking for Twitter. I just gave Instagram and Facebook, and I'm going to give Twitter now.
And LaDrea, if you could do the same thing, because I want people to be able to follow the things that you do. LaDrea does great, great programming and things like that, especially with those who are coming on later. We talked about, she did a Social Justice Olympic Summit, which was a community curated series of events out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And before you all go, I'm going to share my screen again, and I want to share with you all some of the things that we have coming up. So please stay and be patient with me as I get things going here. So as you see on my screen, I mentioned earlier, for those of you who came late, that part of the donations that you all give, those of you who support us on the Patreon, our patrons, a percentage of all that we get goes to an endowment that I started at North Carolina A&T. Also want to mention that I have another podcast that I do based upon one of the courses that I've taught in the past called African Americans in Sport. And I share that responsibility with a homeboy of mine, Dr. Alvin Logan and Dr. Brandon Crooms, who all teach a similar course. And we just bring guest speakers to talk about the experiences of Black folk in sports, not just on the playing field of the courts, but from the business side, from the academic side, even from like personal trainers and social entrepreneurs who are doing all types of good work. And also want to mention that this was the third of 4 Black History Month book discussions that we had. And the last one will take place next Friday with a gentleman by the name of Dorian Williams, who is also a pastor, but a strategic thinker and entrepreneur who is doing great work in the community here in San Antonio, Texas. He is the founder and leader of the MOAD Center, which is a Black-owned co-working space, which is interesting because Black people aren't the largest minority. This is a very brown Mexican-American community. And so finding our way here to support one another through business is different than it is in a city that is more of the Black and white binary. And so he's going to talk about things that we can do not only to build businesses, but this book about strategic planning for Black folk is about like how you do the family thing right? And I think it runs well with what we've been talking about the past few weeks in terms of like our relationships with ourselves, our relationship with our community, and our relationship with our spouses. And so if you all want to join that conversation, you can use the QR code that's on the screen now to register for that last event. And then of course, monthly, I have these conversations again. And I just encourage you all to continue to support and to continue to join these conversations. One last thing before we go, there is a very special discussion that we're going to be having with Black Restaurant Week San Antonio. And there's an author by the name of Adrian Miller, who is a culinary historian of Black food. He was featured on the Netflix documentary. I can't remember what the name was, High on the Hog. So he was one of the people that got interviewed for that. And so he'll be here talking about the 3 books that he's written about the history of Black folk in the culinary arts in the United States. And so again, if you want to continue to support us as a patron, I'm looking for our Founding 55, which will help me hire an intern. We're all about supporting Black businesses. And so we will hire a Black intern or a Black freelancer to help with the editing of the podcast and things like that, so we can continue to deliver great content. And as a patron of Entrepreneurial Appetite, you get access to our monthly discussions, the podcast, and the video recordings. So again, before we leave, Dr. Stewart, thank you for giving us your time. Dr. Ingram, thank you for facilitating. I always appreciate your support, and those of you in the audience, I appreciate you coming. So thank you all.
Thank you, Langston. I'm grateful.
Thank you.